Hello and welcome to another chess video. This is Sakester. Today I'm not sharing one of my own games, live or post-analysis, but a game played by world champion Boris Spassky. The theme of this video is going to be how to play against weak pawns, particularly how to play against isolated queen pawns. And so in this game, Boris Spassky very instructionally shows how to pressure a weak pawn and how to take advantage of this positional trump. This is a game from 1963, played between Boris Spassky and Yuri Averbakh, who is also a famous Russian grandmaster from his generation. Another reason I want to present this video is because Boris Spassky is, unfortunately, I think, known as the guy who lost to Bobby Fischer. And his legacy isn't as much appreciated, especially in America, as it should be. He was a famous attacking player, very aggressive, and he probably would have been world champion for much longer had he not had to face Bobby Fischer, one of the greatest chess players of all time. So here I kind of want to pay tribute to a great player, Boris Spassky, and this positional win that he has. So he is white against Averbakh, who is black. I want to get to the main middle game position. I'll say a couple things about the opening. This is the Rey Lopez, or the Spanish game. Very mainline, but I don't want to talk too much about the opening. Averbakh played d6. He also had the option to play the Marshall Gambit, which is d5. In fact, today people try to avoid this by not playing c3 on move 8. This is a gambit because black sacrifices the e-pawn. Black is a pawn down. But after this, after white plays d3 or d4, black plays bishop d6, and black gets an attack against the white king. And you'll notice that all of white's pieces are undeveloped on the queen side. So this is a very theoretical opening now, and if you want to look at a famous game in this opening, you should take a look at Capablanca versus Marshall himself. Very famous game. So Averbakh didn't play this, and I'm just going through the opening very quickly. Okay, so this is where I want to stop. I don't think that he should have taken here. I think this was the beginning of his problems. Other moves included like rook e8. You can play the knight back to c6. Maybe rook b8 is possible in some lines. Taking left him with this isolated pawn later on. So after we have a couple more moves, he's trying to recoup this d4 pawn. After a couple more moves, trade, he plays this, and we have our main position. So the d4 pawn is going to fall, and after it falls, Spassky is going to start pressuring this d6 pawn. Now, why is this pawn weak? We call this an isolated pawn because it doesn't have any buddies on its left or on its right. See how these pawns protect each other? This pawn is isolated and therefore weak because it can't be protected, by another pawn. Whenever you're working against an isolated pawn, you want to control the square in front of it. Okay? This way it can't move forward and kind of free itself. So the first thing you do when you're playing against an isolated pawn is to control the d5 square, the square in front of it. Once you control that square, you can start attacking the pawn. So Spassky is eyeing this square. And now he's developing his pieces. I'm working with the analysis of Grandmaster Herman Grooten, who's a Dutch Grandmaster, and he's recommended that slightly more accurate was the immediate queen d2, because the move order Spassky uses kind of wastes tempo. You'll see that now he plays queen d2, and after his opponent moves, he played rook d1. So if you played it, if we played queen d2 first, and rook c8, Spassky could have saved a move there. Okay? So here Spassky realized that he wants to keep rooks on the board so that he can pressure this pawn down the file, right? Okay, so knight went back to e5, and Spassky starts pushing. So now there were many options. Averbakh played knight c4, which landed him in some troubles. Although the other options were not that much better. If the knight goes back, Spassky could trade one advantage for another. So he gets rid of the weak d6 pawn, but he makes for himself a very strong passed pawn. Okay? Notice how this bishop is bearing down on the king. So his opponent would have to play this, and there's a very nice move, queen d7. Of course, you can't take, because if you take... Oh, I'm sorry. If you take with the bishop, we take with check. And after the king moves, we've won a piece. We get our queen back. And actually, this is just completely winning. This pawn is very strong. But you don't have to take. You can also, if they play this, rook c1 is very strong, and this is just winning. Another option for black in this position was knight to g6. After the clever knight e2, we play f5, and there's really no good way to protect d6. So these variations kind of show different ways that white can seize an advantage. Averbakh played knight c4, which left him with another problem. After bishop takes, pawn takes. Knight e2, very good move. Now Spassky is going to be working against these two pawns, okay? He could have taken with the rook, but after b3, rook c7, knight f3, pressuring this, rook c6, e5. Once again, the pawn is dropping. You can't move the pawn because there's this pressure on the pin. So the pawn is just going to fall. So his opponent did not like that and saddled himself with these two weaknesses. Why are they weak? Because even though they're kind of connected, they're next to each other, they're actually both isolated. Notice how the d5 square is controlled by white, and the c3 square is controlled by white. So even though they're right next to each other, you can kind of consider these as two isolated pawns. So watch how Spassky does this. The bishop attacks the rook moves, and you go back. And so this knight, it rerouted, so it started off on the d4 square. Notice how this Spassky rerouted the knights. So it controls this pawn, and it also controls the other pawn. So this knight is on its perfect square. Spassky continued, putting maximum pressure on the d6 pawn, h6, and here we go, queen e3. Black has no useful counterplay in this position. He tries to put pressure on the b pawn, but Spassky simply protects it with his rook. Rook goes back, and now Spassky is going to double on the file. He moved his queen out of the way here for his rooks to have space, right? So he doubles, putting a lot of pressure on this d6 pawn. Queen goes back, and I'll give you a minute, maybe you can pause the video, but how would you continue here? Because the pawn is amply protected, the d6 pawn. So how does white amp up the pressure? You can pause the video and think about what you would play in this position. Okay, so if you suggested queen g3, you were right on. There's nothing much more we can do to pressure this pawn. For example, if we tried to build a sort of Alekhine's gun, actually, maybe that does work. I didn't actually analyze this. Maybe black can protect this. Yeah, so maybe rook c6, and the pawn is just protected, right? If I'm not missing anything. Well, no, there's still problems. Because if black just waits, let's say he does nothing, Then we have e5, and there's a pin on the rook. So, not 100% sure. I didn't check it with the computer, so I don't want to waste too much time with it. Maybe queen e1 was also worth consideration. But Spassky follows the principle of once you make a weakness, you want to open a second front. Now that black is tied down to this pawn on d6, he wants to open a second front and pressure another side of the board while all the pieces are on one side, right? So it's usually not enough to... one weakness is not enough to win a game. You need two weaknesses before you can really win a piece or win some material, right? So now he unpins, and just one idea, by the way, if he plays rook c6 here, the same idea, e5, and this pressure kills black. So king moves, and f5, very strong move, opening the queen on the pawn, and very soon the pawn just drops. In fact, there's no good way to protect it. By the way, black couldn't play something like, he couldn't double up on the pawn. Let's say we do this. Black can't protect it this way because he has another weakness on c4. So notice how the c4 weakness also ties black down, right? So king f8, f5, and the pawn drops. And the rest of the game is also instructive, so I want to go over it. Spassky tries to trade and hopes he can save an endgame, being a pawn down. If he took this pawn on e4, white wins. He plays the very strong f6, and after g takes f6, rook e2 pinning the bishop, f5, otherwise you lose the bishop, and we take here, and black's king is going to have a very hard time finding a square to live. So instead, he played queen e5, and we trade. And so watch how Spassky brings the point home. Protects e4 first. a5, rook b6, attacking the bishop. Bishop moves. Rook a6, attacking the pawn. King moves. And now Spassky, something that I notice a lot of beginners forget to do. In endgame, beginners forget to play with their king. Now that the queens are off and there's less of a chance of you getting checkmated, the king can also play a role in the game. So now the king is going to defend the e4 pawn so that the rook is free to move. Right? So now the rook is free to move, and it comes around here, putting pressure on this weakness. a4. And now king d4, centralizing the king. Spassky he probably didn't think much about taking this free pawn, because this would land him in some trouble. As they say, knights on the rim are dim, right? So it's going to be far away from the battlefield. And black gets counterplay with rook e5. After the knight goes back, we just take. And this pin wins the piece back. And black has sufficient counterplay for the material lost because of his active rooks. So Spassky's advantage would be much smaller if he let that happen, and instead he played the centralizing move king d4. Bishop went back, rook b6, h5, trying to stop g4, because this expansion is also going to impede black's movement. Spassky plays g4 anyway. h4, and now we're doubling on the 7th rank. And we call this the pigs on the 7th, where the rooks will just eat all the pawns, and sometimes there are back rank checkmate threats. So, yeah, when you have 2 rooks on the 7th, usually you're kind of winning. Except for probably some rare positions. But 2 rooks on the 7th is a very good positional trump. And now the knight comes to the beautiful d5 square. Notice how this d5 square has been very important the whole game, right? Both before and after the pawn was on d6. Pins the knight, g5, expanding. Put some pressure, and now he takes the pawn. In my analysis, I was looking at just some ways to really be oversafe because king. This is what happened in the game, and the rook got a little bit active, right? If you want to completely eliminate all activity from black, I consider the move king c5. And black is almost in zugzwang. After check, black doesn't really have any useful moves. So you can play rook c7. This is a waiting move. And I mean, the computer suggests to just trade, but we don't want to trade as human beings, right? So if he just goes check and goes back, now we're using this pawn, the opponent's pawn, as a shield, so that the rook can't break through. So his pieces can't get through to white side. After knight f4, similar to the game, we play g6, and we break through. Right? Notice how the knight controls this square, so there's no activity for black's rooks. So I thought this was a way to just be super, super solid. But Spassky figured everything out, and this was probably objectively the best move. He just took the pawn, and now he's 2 pawns up. Looks a little bit scary for a second, but Spassky had it all figured out. Brings his king closer, and now he plays a very strong g6, ripping open the 7th rank here. After f6 check, he played knight takes f6. I wonder how many of you would have continued this way, and I think this really shows Spassky's his tactical vision and his instinct for attack, because he was an aggressive player. And so even though he sacrificed a piece, 3 connected passed pawns is not bad, right? As well as mating threats. So after rook c6 check, his opponent simply resigned, because the game could continue this, like this, and there is really nothing you can do about the threat of the pawns moving forward and the checkmate, right? Yeah. So let's just quickly go over this game, just very quickly. Just look at the main ideas. So we didn't talk too much about the opening. Just gonna go through this very quickly. Okay, so this was the main position. We are pressuring this weak d6 pawn, right? So he bring all of his pieces to control that pawn. Now he gains space. Trades, making his second weakness. Bringing his knight to the very nice post on c3. Moving his queen out of the way so he can double rooks. Now it looks so easy when Spassky does it, but keep in mind he's playing as a grandmaster. And very good technique makes the game look easy, right? So it's very impressive how easy Spassky makes this look. Now he brings his king in, pressures the a pawn, and he doesn't even bother taking it. And now he expands on the king side. And after the rook comes in, he's going to play king e5 and g6. And now that the 7th rank is open, black is losing. Okay, so he resigned in this position. So I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something about how to play against protected passed pawns. How to play against isolated pawns. You want to control the weak square in front of it, and also it's important that once you control it and once you pressure the pawn, you open a second front, and black is stretched too thin to defend both. So I hope you enjoyed this game, and I look forward to making another video. Thank you for watching.